Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast edition, the last one, I think, of 2023. Joining us as always, the Prince of Twitter, the Regent of Red State, redstate.com, I should say. And I can't think of anything for Christmas.
The herald of Christmas.
The Herald of Christmas. I was going to say the Yahoo of Yuletide. I don't think that's enough.
Ed, you're on today. Oh my goodness.
Oh man, I don't know what came over me. Frankly,
the yokel of Yuletide.
The yokel of Yuletide. Yeah.
I don't spend a lot of time on podcasts, but do other podcasts have as much fun as we do?
I don't think so. This is, this and my live chat with Cam Edwards are really like my 2 highlights of the week when it comes to, of course I also do the thing with Adam, and that's always great. It's, those are great discussions, but we don't joke around quite as much as you and I do on these things. So yeah, this is just it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah, it should be fun. Because you don't have to listen to podcasts, right? You have to want to do it. So you might as well make it fun to do.
Yeah, exactly. This is what it's supposed to be about, and especially this season, right? I don't want to get too heavy because it's the last one before Christmas. We should talk a little bit about Christmas. We talk about your columns, but I think we want to start off with the media coverage of the announcement from the Vatican today by the dicastery of it's basically the doctrinal office. The dicastery for the doctrine of the faith is the official name of this office at the Vatican. But they released a declaration regarding blessings for individuals in irregular situations, including same-sex marriages and cohabiting. Right?
Is when they release something, is that signed by the Pope?
This particular one wasn't. Sometimes they are, but they both. If it's coming from the dicastery of the doctrine for the doctrine of the faith, it has enforcement authority. They have that enforcement authority.
So but it also means the Pope is good with it.
It means the Pope is good with it. Yeah, even if it doesn't have his signature on it, it means the Pope is good with it. In this case, it was trying to clean up something the Pope had done earlier in comments about blessings for same-sex unions. And as Pope Francis often was somewhat ambiguous about this, and they're trying to clean it up. And if you read the document, which is apparently too much of a stretch for most American journalists, what you find is that the Vatican is saying you can't bless same-sex unions. You can't bless cohabiting unions. But what you can do is offer the same kind of blessings that you give to everybody else, and what's called spontaneous, non-liturgical blessings, right? So if you go to a priest and say, "Hey, Father, can you bless me? I need a blessing," or a deacon or a bishop, anybody who's ordained, they'll make the sign of the cross over you and say something like, "May God bless you and bring you closer to the faith," or resolve the issues in your life, or whatever it is. Those are spontaneous blessings that pretty much any member of the clergy can do. But what activists wanted, and especially in Germany, is they wanted approval to offer liturgical blessings specifically to the relationships. And what this letter said today is you can't offer any blessings on relationships that contradict the church's teaching on faith, but you can bless the individuals involved in them, either separately or together, as sort of a general, may God bless you sort of thing. And I got to tell you, it doesn't surprise me that this happened. But it's certainly remarkable that what they took from that, what the American media took from that was, and I kid you not, Pope Francis okays blessings of same-sex unions, same-sex marriages.
Now, how could they get that from something that is the exact opposite?
Because the Associated Press screwed this up, and everybody followed suit. As far as I know, the Associated Press was the first one to report this in Western secular media. Now, there were Catholic media sources that were actually much more accurate, but the Associated Press and the Western media, pretty much, generally speaking, wanted to report what it wanted to report. And I saw this, when I was covering the Synod on the Family, and I think that was 2014. So it's like almost a decade ago. I was in Rome for 2 weeks covering the Synod there. And some of these issues were bubbling to the surface there too. And the media got that wrong as well. The Pope was saying we need to make the church welcoming to all individuals, right? Regardless of what their orientation is. We need to make the church welcoming. So everybody reported that as Pope Francis is changing the doctrine to welcome
everybody.
And everybody who understands what was going on there was looking around going, they've always been welcome, but they can't get married. That's and the Pope was kind of firm on that at the time too, that they're not going to bless these, same-sex marriages, same-sex unions, cohabitation, divorcees, remarrying without annulments, that sort of thing. They weren't changing the doctrine at all. They were just basically trying to figure out, how do you express the gospel to people who fall outside of the doctrines of the church? And that's what that part of the Synod was about. There was other things going on there too. But they all got it wrong then too. So it doesn't surprise me in the least that they got it wrong today. But get it wrong, they did.
Have they caught on yet?
I haven't followed up with any of these. What I looked at was the ABC News version of the Associated Press report that kind of got this ball rolling, right? And I did a screenshot of the headline because I was pretty sure they're going to change it at some point. I don't know if they have or not, but it was Pope Francis. I'll make sure I'm quoting this accurately as well as firmly. Because I don't want to introduce even more errors into this. So give me just a second while I spin this up. But they were the headline actually read, Pope says priests can bless same-sex unions, which the letter from the dicastery explicitly said they could not do. I mean, all you needed to do was read the first 5 paragraphs of this, first 3 paragraphs, and you would have known that headline was the opposite of what it was that they were saying.
It's amazing.
It's amazing to me too, because this stuff is available. It wasn't like they were hiding it. They put it on the website. They have an English language translation on the Vatican website, which is a pretty, Vatican.va. It's pretty easy to find. Although, in fairness, I did have to poke around to figure out where it was that they actually stuck this letter, because somebody needs to go in there and do some redesign, I think. But I ended up going through, I think I went through the press office to get to the link where this thing was at. But, it took me 3 minutes, maybe tops, to find it.
Oh, Ed, we don't have time for that. There's a deadline.
Honestly, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
I don't have time to be right. We had an editor on the Times who was a really good man. He was like the editor in charge of not discipline, but making sure you towed the line. And he said that the common excuse, I don't have time to write a short story. Right. And the point was that if you just blurt it out, it'll be too long and it's easy, but you don't have the time to write it short. So they don't have the time to read 3 paragraphs. That's disgusting.
It's really nonsense, right? This is, look, I think if you're covering a shooting in the Capitol, or let's take a news item from yesterday. We're recording this on Monday, which I think the press actually reported pretty responsibly. There was somebody slammed their car into Joe Biden's motorcade
while it was parked.
But we didn't know that initially, right? All we knew is that there was an accident and somebody had run their car into the motorcade, which of course leaves you with all sorts of speculation as to why that might have happened. And as it turns out, it was just a guy who was drunk, who inadvertently ran into the parked cars at the motorcade.
Allegedly. Yes.
Allegedly drunk. Yes, allegedly drunk. He was booked for a DUI and then released, right? So it tells you that intent wasn't really the issue here. But the media didn't go off reporting, assassination attempt on Joe Biden. Why? Because there was no evidence of that, right? And they knew that. They didn't know what was going on entirely, but they knew that that wasn't really the story. And they weren't going to report that unless they got some sort of actual factual.
And the pool report was very professional. It said what happened. They didn't pump it, hype it, or anything. It was just a car has crashed in, and agents have gone to it. And the pool reports are usually pretty good, except for, remember at the beginning of the Trump administration when they reported that he had thrown out the Martin Luther King bust?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It was on a table standing behind somebody, and the reporter couldn't move to check the table. Give me a break.
Or even more recent thing. Remember the Israeli strike on the Gaza hospital that destroyed the hospital and killed 500 people? They couldn't even wait for the sun to go up so they could see that the hospital was actually still standing. And the only thing that happened to the hospital was that the windows got blown out because a Palestinian rocket had fallen in the parking lot and gone boom. This is another one of those things. Another one of those.
You should never buy homemade rockets from the Palestinians. Those Hamas people have a reputation for crappy rockets because they make them out of water pipes they dug up.
Well, yeah, the aiming devices are the water pipes that they dug up. Yeah, the rockets they're homemaking, or they're getting some parts from Iran, and they use the fuel that comes into Gaza as rocket fuel. And so 20-30% of these things fall out of the sky almost as soon as they go up, which is the reason why when you hear of a rocket strike in Gaza, it's probably a Palestinian rocket that caused it, because that's not what the Israelis use. They use, they don't even use bombers. They were using fighters that drop,
JDAMs.
JDAMs or more targeted missiles. And to the extent that they use any so-called dumb bombs, they do it in a dive so they can make sure that it hits with precision on the target that they're
right.
So, all of these things, it just takes a few moments to check this stuff out. In this case, literally, I think I had the dicastery letter in 3 minutes, and this isn't breaking news. This is, if you understand what the story actually is, it's no change at all. If anything, it's more restrictive than what it's been like since.
I just
talking about this.
It's so disappointing. I don't want to talk about media mistakes anymore. It's just so disheartening,
Yeah, I think you get and so here's AFP. While we're talking, AFP has a headline up here on Twitter. He just sent it out 1 minute ago. The Vatican has approved blessings for same-sex couples, a hugely contested issue in the Catholic Church, as long as they are not in context related to civil unions or weddings. Even that's inaccurate. The blessing isn't on the relationship. It doesn't matter if they're in the relationship. What matters is that the individuals are asking to be blessed, and priests have always been able to do that, right? But and the letter makes this clear. You can't bless the relationship. You can bless the people in the relationship, but you can't bless the relationship because you can't.
What's a blessing supposed to be? Is kind of like have a nice day or what?
Yeah, it's the Catholic version of have a nice day. What it's supposed to do, because all these things have spiritual impact. The spiritual impact of, and by the way, the letter from the dicastery goes into great detail as to what the spiritual impact of these blessings are supposed to be. And the spiritual impact is it's supposed to open one's heart to the word of God, right? And to bring them closer to that word and to the gospel, and to invite the Lord into their lives to help fix whatever's wrong, which is exactly what blessings are in every other context as well. And again, all this is saying is that, yes, you can bless individuals, which you've always been able to do as a priest
Yeah.
or a deacon or a
So
bishop.
why, if it's more of the same, why are they putting a special paper out?
Because, and this is the part where I think it creates the issue, right? Because Pope Francis sent out a letter that was ambiguous in its nature about what priests could and couldn't do in regards to same-sex relationships and cohabiting couples. And a number of priests decided to take the maximalist point of view possible. Yeah, interpretation is a better is a better way of putting it, and started blessing these unions, right? I think sometimes in the context of a ceremony of these things, especially in Germany, which is frankly where most heresy is originating anyway in the Catholic Church. But I digress.
Those they're all related to Martin Luther King somehow.
Martin Luther, anyway, maybe. Martin Luther.
That's what I mean.
Who, by the way, Martin Luther would not have been a fan of this. Martin Luther would have absolutely not been a fan of this. But the dicastery had to put this letter out to tell the priests to stop doing that. That's really what the story is behind this. Francis X. Roca over at the Wall Street Journal picked up on that, right? As well as a couple other Catholic-based media. Frank, by the way, is great. Frank has better understanding of all of these things. So to the point, where we might not be in alignment, I'd always say, go with Frank. He's there. He's been there for years. He knows what's going on. And so I always, Frank, John Allen Jr. is another one. I haven't seen his work on that. The Pillar with Ed Condon and J.D. Flynn, also great sources, and they're doing a lot of work on this today too. But the point is that this actually is probably intended to restrict the actions of some priests, especially in Germany on this point. And as usual, the American mainstream media got it entirely backwards. And they're still
so AP misreads it and everybody else follows it.
Well, and I'm going to say this. I don't know that AP was first in misinterpreting it. It's the first one that I saw.
Yeah.
But I suspect that Associated Press is the one.
Ed, in our world, if you say it, that's the way it is. So
don't ever go on that basis.
If you were the first to see it, and that was the first thing you saw, that's it. That was okay. All right. Well, moving on. Bless you, my son.
Forgive me, Andrew, for I have sinned.
I had a wonderful friend. He's gone now, but who was a priest, and then he left the faith. He didn't leave the faith. He left being a priest, and he was a teacher, philosophy teacher, just a brilliant man, a wonderful writer, famous writer, Eugene Kennedy, and he used to joke that he would get on a plane and he'd be wearing his priest collar, and everyone would feel like they had to talk to him and confess. And he said, well, it got to be like on an airplane. I knew I couldn't get any reading. I couldn't get any work done because everybody would start talking to me about their problems. And he said, no, I would try to help. Of course, that's the job. But sometimes I just wanted to take a nap. And he said he finally got so that he would sit down next to somebody, and if the guy looked like, oh, I'm going to start talking about the faith, then Gene would turn to him and say, have you been saved? And he said that kind of terminated any further discussion about faith.
I had a priest. I had a friend of mine I had a priest friend who was telling Marcia and I. He was our pastor for several years. Great guy, and he's currently, I think, still the vicar general up in the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis, because he got stuck with that job after being pastor. But he told us that it was always sort of a toss-up for him whether or not to wear his clerics when he was traveling because of that, right?
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, and this is years ago, so I mean, my memory might be a little fuzzy on this. I think he finally came down on the side that if people are coming up to him, it might be because they really need a priest. And so he decided that he was going to wear his clerics when he was traveling. But not necessarily all the time, but that he would sort of go in that direction. He would lean in that direction.
Yeah.
He had a couple of instances where,
well, that's, when it's a calling, it's amazing. The dedication.
It was a calling for him.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's amazing. Well, what else is calling you, Ed?
Well, what's calling to me is the Andrew Malcolm columns, the VIP columns that Andrew Malcolm writes at redstate.com, because they're always really good. Now, there's a couple of them since the last time that we talked. The fact that Joe Biden has backed off his menthol cigarette ban because
blacks love it.
Because it was dangerous. It was more dangerous for Biden's political health than it was for
their actual health, physical health. Yeah, exactly.
Actual health of voters.
Yeah, 80% of blacks who smoke, or 80% of menthol cigarette smokers are blacks, and so they had it all done last summer, and they were prepared to do it sometime this month, and then wait, the polls came out and showed the black men especially were drifting away towards Donald Trump. And so, we need to study this some more. So they put it off till next March, and I'll bet you a clerical collar that it gets put off after next March.
Or a blessing. I'll bet you a blessing.
I'll bet you a blessing. Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. But the fun one this week was the Ukraine column. When Mark Tyson who's at the American Enterprise Institute, and he writes for the Washington Post. He and a team of researchers at the AEI did a very, very deep dive. I mean, they needed diving suits to do this one, dive into the aid to Ukraine. And it was stunning to me. And I thought more people should know about it. But the more I dug into it, it was stunning that everybody say, we should save that money that we're sending to Ukraine and put it into the border. Well, nobody's going to argue. Well, they are, I guess, because they don't do it. But most people would say we should protect our own borders. But the fact of the matter is that 90% of the billions of dollars in military aid going to Ukraine doesn't go to Ukraine. It stays right here, making American jobs, making bombs and Javelin missiles and 155 millimeter artillery shells and so on. So it's basically an economic stimulus package for the arms industry. And people say, well, we don't want war. Yeah, but we don't want to be naked like we were that invited Pearl Harbor. Our arms industry, and actually all of NATO's arms industry, went into what you'd call went into basically a storage shed after the Soviet Union fell in 1991.
Right.
And they just haven't been making it. That's why it's short. So what the ammunition that we're sending to Ukraine is actually clearing out the storehouses of the old stuff that won't be used because it was made for a tank war on the plains of Europe. And the next war we have is probably going to be against Japan, which will be maritime and aeronautical. So the money then goes to make new stuff that we need so that we don't look as weak as we do with Joe Biden as president.
And I understand why people are concerned over the costs. But as you write in here, uh, we're not putting troops at risk here.
No, exactly. Exactly.
This is, I mean, first off, this is Putin's doing. He's the one invading Ukraine. It's not like Ukraine just decided to have a war with Putin. This is entirely Putin's idea. And that we have a treaty relationship with Ukraine that said that we would defend its territorial integrity in exchange for relinquishing the nuclear arms that it retained after the fall of the Soviet Union, which Ukraine did. They gave them up, gave them back to Russia. And we have an obligation under that treaty to support their efforts to enforce their territorial integrity. And this is the least expensive way of doing it. I mean, just simply
it costs.
selling them.
We're sending metal and weapons, and it's devastating the Russian military. 90% of the pre-war Russian military has been annihilated or wounded and put out of service. That's why they have to recruit 300,000 new soldiers, and they don't train them in this year. And Putin is counting on the impatience of those people who say, well, we shouldn't be sending all this stuff to Ukraine. Well, if you don't send it to Ukraine, if we don't stop Putin now, guess what? He's going to keep on keeping on. He might do Moldova, which is not a NATO ally, but he could very well do the Baltic states, which are NATO allies. So then we'll be involved live fire with American troops. So to me, it's it's sad that there's a war, but we're helping Ukraine defend themselves the same way, Ed, in 1787 that the French helped us.
Yes,
Keep our independence. So they had their own self-interest in doing it, strategic interest, and so do we. So
yeah, and Putin reacted to that today by saying that he's going to start moving units up to the 800-mile Finnish border now because Finland joined NATO, and which I think has just recently become active. And saying, well, now we're going to have trouble with Finland, and we're going to cause Finland. We're going to move units up there. It's like, yeah, you're going to have to move units up there, pal. And good luck fighting the Finns. The Russians have Russians don't have a very good track record of fighting the Finns. But at any rate, that's the point. They're going to have to get spread out a lot more. It's going to cost them a lot more to defend their own borders because of what they're doing in Ukraine. And again, Russia is violating that same treaty that I just talked about, because Russia also guaranteed Ukraine territorial integrity on the lines that Ukraine was granted when it asserted its independence in 1991. And Russia traded that recognition and those borders to get its nuclear weapons back so that Ukrainians couldn't use them against Russia. They had a good reason to get those missiles back, especially when these
guys like Hitler and Saddam, when they start moving in on other countries, they don't stop until they are stopped. Putin took over 2 provinces of Georgia in 2008. We didn't do anything except mumble. Actually, Obama was on vacation then. It took him a week to say something. And 2014, he took over Crimea and large chunks of eastern Ukraine. And all we did was sanctions. Well, see how well they worked. So if you don't stop him now, he's not going to stop. And it's just history. We don't study history anymore in schools, sadly, but it's what happens. And I'd rather help Ukraine fight its own battles than be drawn into our own unnecessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that mutual defense clause of the NATO treaty, that if one party is attacked, everybody is attacked, that's only been used once, Ed, since 1949. And that was Afghanistan, when everybody came to our rescue after 9/11, and everybody jumped in to help in Afghanistan. So it's not like we could say, not us. we're in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's worked. It's worked since 1949. Anyway, well,
I think I think all we got to say now is some Merry Christmases and
Merry
the jokes
Christmas.
of.
I have one amazing new joke that I have to share.
All right, go for it.
Okay, so three women they're having a girls' night out. They get in a car crash, and sadly, they're all killed. So they get to heaven, and St. Peter says, "Well, you girls are welcome, but you need to understand we have one rule here: you can't step on any ducks." And the women go, "What?" I said, "Well, we have a lot of ducks, and you can't step on them." They go, "Okay, that's not a problem." So they get in, and right away, one woman's not looking. There's ducks everywhere. She steps on a duck. So the guards come up, and they handcuff her to the ugliest man you have ever seen. And that's it for stepping on a duck. So a few days go by, and the second woman, same thing. Guy comes up, handcuffs her to an ugly man because she stepped on a duck. Well, the third woman says, geez, so she's very, very careful. And she goes for some months. And then she's walking along one day, and the guards come up with the most handsome man she has ever seen. I mean, he is so handsome. He's movie star handsome. And she goes, wow. And they say, well, we have to handcuff him to you. And she says, okay, that's fine with me. And so they're walking along, and the woman says, why are you handcuffed to me? And the guy says, well, I don't know about you, but I stepped on a duck.
Don't step on a duck, folks.
Don't step on a duck because you might be uglier than you think.
Don't step on a duck.
Yeah.
All right, I got one for you.
All right.
This will be our PG-13 joke here. So elderly couples vacationing in the West, and the husband always wanted a pair of authentic cowboy boots. So he sees some on sale, and he just can't resist them. And so he wears them home, and he's walking proudly. He walks into the room, says to his wife, he says, notice anything different? She looks a moment, she says, nope. The husband says, come on, take a good look. Do you notice anything different about me? She looks again, she says, no. So he gets ticked off. He stomps off to the bathroom, completely undresses, walks out with nothing on except the boots, and says, now do you notice anything different? And she says, look, it was hanging down yesterday, it's hanging down today, and it'll be hanging down tomorrow. And the husband gets really angry. He says, you know why it's hanging down? Because it's looking at my new boots. And the wife says, well, you should have bought a hat.
Oh, that had two twists. You got me twice on that one, Edward. Oh.
Should have bought a hat.
Should have bought a hat.
Should have bought a hat.
Should have bought a hat. Okay.
All right. Well,
all right.
Andrew, it's been a fun year. We're not going to get a chance to do this again until the year turns over into 2024.
I'll see you next year, Ed. Yeah.
We will see you next year. We'll see our loyal viewers next year. But Merry Christmas to you. Merry Christmas to your entire family. And I hope it's got all the blessings that you expect and more from it.
Thank you very much. The same to you. And I didn't even have to ask for the blessing. Thank you.
Notice it was a spontaneous, generalized
blessing, and had nothing to do with my relationship. And you didn't even have and you don't have your collar on.
I don't even have the collar on. I'm traveling without my clearance. I don't know what Andrew Malcolm, the Prince of Twitter, the Regent of RedState.com, and whatever.
Whatever. Thank you, Ed, for this year, and thank you for your amazing, enduring friendship. I treasure that.
Right back at you. It's one of my best Christmas gifts ever. Is our friendship and our ability to do this. Thank you to our viewers. We will be back next year.